Amid a snowstorm, he almost didn't recognize her beneath the winter hood, but those curiously familiar little faces paralyzed him. Two adorable girls, so much like him. Now, his billionaire heart must decide between staying cold or warming them forever. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Olivia pushed open the heavy door of the ski lodge at the earliest hint of dawn. Overnight snowdrifts had piled against the side of the building, forcing her to step carefully onto the path cleared by the resort maintenance crew. A brisk wind stung her cheeks and made her tighten the scarf around her neck as she hefted 2 plastic bags of groceries. She could hear the muffled hum of the resort staff finishing their shifts inside, but she had no time to linger. She needed to get home and see her daughters before heading to her second shift in a few hours. Her breath emerged in quick, wispy puffs as she trudged along the icy walkway. Each crunch under her boots reminded her of the responsibilities waiting at home. The first glimmer of sunrise brushed the horizon, giving the sky a soft, purplish tint. It would have been serene if she wasn't so weighed down by worry over unpaid bills and mounting stress. As she rounded the corner of the lodge, she spotted Grace and Naomi huddled together under the wooden shelter that served as a temporary bus stop for resort workers. Both girls wore bright jackets, one in a cheery mustard yellow, the other in a vivid rose pink. Their eyes sparkled with innocent delight as they tried to catch snowflakes on their tongues. Seeing them like that, a brief moment of carefree childhood, was the highlight of Olivia's tiring day. "Look, Mommy's here," Grace exclaimed, pointing a mittened hand in Olivia's direction. Naomi, just as exuberant, hopped from foot to foot in the snowy slush. Their matching brown curls peeked out from under their knitted hats, forming soft, bouncing spirals. Before Olivia could reach them, she heard her friend Mia call out her name from a nearby employee entrance. Mia's wide, reassuring smile was the only warmth Olivia felt in the chilly morning air. Setting her grocery bags on a safe patch of ground, she gave her friend a quick hug. "You look exhausted," Mia said softly. "You need a day off." Olivia shook her head. "That's not an option right now," she murmured. "But thanks for looking after them while I grabbed these groceries." Mia shrugged, waving away the thanks. "They're sweethearts. Besides, what are friends for?" Olivia collected her bags again and ushered her daughters from the small shelter. The girls scampered to her side, giggling about the snow still drifting from low-hanging clouds overhead. Holiday decorations lined the streetlights leading away from the ski resort's main lot, twinkling bulbs and candy cane stripes that reminded Olivia of simpler, happier times. She forced a small smile for her daughters as she guided them carefully along the icy sidewalk. Just as she reached the main street, her left boot slid on a particularly slick patch of ice. Her grocery bags threatened to tumble out of her grasp, and she let out a startled yelp. Mia called her name, ready to catch her if needed, but Olivia regained her balance at the last second. Her heart fluttered at the near fall, a reminder that everything felt precarious these days. She exhaled a shaky laugh. "I'm okay," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The movement of passers-by quickened around them, people on their way to work or heading home after the night shift, all bundled in coats, scarves, and gloves. Strings of golden lights flickered from storefronts offering early bird holiday deals. The smell of roasting chestnuts from a street vendor drifted over, momentarily warming the crisp air. Then, in the midst of adjusting her hold on the grocery bags, Olivia saw a familiar figure across the street. He stood near a sleek black car, speaking with someone she didn't recognize. His tailored coat was dark, sharply pressed, hinting at the kind of money he had always seemed destined for. A rush of cold that had nothing to do with the weather surged through her. Benjamin. She froze, eyes fixed on the planes of his face. Though a few years older, he carried himself with the same poised confidence she remembered. She felt a sudden upwelling of emotion, part anger, part longing, part shock. She'd never expected to see him again, certainly not in this snowy little mountain town where she'd tried to start over. His attention was locked on his associate, a man scribbling notes on a leather-bound pad. They talked in hushed but animated tones, occasionally gesturing to the tall buildings beyond the resort's boundary. Olivia could only guess it involved some major real estate deal, perhaps the rumored hotel expansion that had been swirling through local gossip. It took only a moment for Benjamin to glance her way. His eyes flickered in recognition, though he appeared unsure if he was seeing a ghost or something real. Under the swirl of snow, half the street between them, he hesitated, lips parting slightly. Olivia's pulse kicked wildly, and she almost turned to flee, but it was too late. Her feet refused to move. Before either of them could do more than stare, the flash of a camera illuminated the snowflakes drifting through the air. A local reporter in a thick green parka dashed forward, camera raised. "Benjamin, is that you?" the reporter shouted. "Any comment on the new hotel project?" The reporter clicked the shutter repeatedly, causing nearby pedestrians to slow and watch. Whispers spread through the growing crowd. "That's the wealthy developer rumored to bring in a massive project. That's the man who might change everything around here." The swirl of interest multiplied within seconds, reminiscent of a miniature feeding frenzy in the quiet town center. Olivia instinctively shielded Grace and Naomi, pulling them in close. The twins, startled by the commotion, pressed against her sides. She felt their small hands clinging to her jacket. Mia, sensing the tension, joined in, trying to keep everyone calm. Benjamin turned away from his associate, cutting the conversation short. He appeared concerned about the sudden disruption. Olivia could see the furrow in his brow as he scanned the gathering onlookers, then locked eyes on her across the swirling snow. The crowd pressed in from all sides, curious about the potential big story unfolding right in front of them. The reporter angled for a better shot, stepping backward without noticing the ice patch behind him. He stumbled, bumped into a passerby, and set off a small chain reaction of slips and shoves. People jostled for space, trying to avoid getting knocked over. One of the grocery bags slipped from Olivia's grasp, scattering a few canned items across the sidewalk. Grace let out a frightened squeak as she wobbled, nearly losing her footing. Naomi's eyes went wide, and she reached for her mother's coat. Mia tried to grab Grace, but the sudden press of bodies was too much. Olivia felt herself tilting sideways, bracing for the hard impact with the ground. Then, out of nowhere, a firm hand caught her arm and pulled her upright. Her vision blurred for an instant, but when it cleared, she found herself face to face with Benjamin. He held her steady, his hand warm despite the bite of the cold. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, speechless, mind reeling. Behind him, his associate was attempting to ward off the reporter, who still clamored for a statement. The entire exchange seemed unreal, as though time had slowed enough for Olivia to register each detail. The crisp scent of his cologne, the swirl of snow caught in his hair, the tension in his gaze. Grace and Naomi, still clutching Olivia's legs, peered up at Benjamin. There was an innocence in their eyes that pricked Olivia's heart. Even through the confusion, she could see the unspoken questions forming in her daughter's expressions. Something about him must have struck them, the glimmer of recognition they couldn't name. The wind picked up, scattering loose snow in a white haze around them. Benjamin gently released Olivia's arm, but the look on his face suggested 100 words unspoken. For a second, neither of them could move. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by distant car horns and the ever-present rush of the mountain breeze. Olivia realized she was still standing dangerously close to Benjamin. She swallowed hard, her emotions tangled in a tight knot: hurt, anger, confusion, relief. She remembered the sting of his disappearance from her life and the nights she'd spent awake, heart thumping against her ribcage, unsure how she'd manage to raise her children without support. Now, here he was, flesh and blood, looking at her as though seeing something precious he'd lost. A lifetime seemed to pass in the few seconds they faced one another. The reporter, the associate, even Mia and the bystanders, all faded to the periphery of her awareness. She saw the question in Benjamin's eyes, the unvoiced plea for her to say something, anything, to ground him in this moment. She looked down at Grace and Naomi, who stared at Benjamin with unabashed curiosity. The turmoil in her heart flared to life, but it was laced with an undeniable flicker of hope that she tried desperately to extinguish. For an instant, the street felt strangely calm, as if the snowfall muffled every outside sound. The commotion from the reporter was a distant hum. Nothing else mattered except the man in front of her, the children at her side, and the weight of a past she had never fully let go of. Olivia parted her lips, voice trembling with a mixture of hesitation and longing. "Benjamin?" she whispered, face flushed with cold and emotion, while Grace and Naomi clung more tightly to her legs. Benjamin's eyes widened in recognition. Everything else seemed to pause in the swirling snow. Olivia's breath clouded the air as she hurried the twins away from the bustling sidewalk. Mia stayed behind for a moment to gather up the scattered groceries, waving Olivia on with a quick, reassuring gesture that said, "Go, just go." The crisp wind whipped Olivia's hair loose from her scarf as she guided Grace and Naomi along a narrower side street leading toward their modest apartment. Neither girl complained. They sensed their mother's urgency, clinging to her hands and exchanging curious looks. Her heart was pounding from more than just the cold. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Benjamin following. But when she looked back, there was only the swirl of snow and the dim outline of onlookers near the resort's main entrance. Benjamin still stood there from what she could see, confusion etched on his face. He looked as if he wanted to chase after her, but something was holding him back. Maybe the photographer, maybe his own shock. Olivia didn't stick around to find out. By the time she reached the safety of her small apartment building, her legs were shaky. She fumbled for her keys, her breath uneven. She just wanted to get inside, away from the open street and the possibilities that lingered there. Pushing the front door open, she ushered the girls up the creaky wooden staircase, ignoring the loud protest of the third step. Their apartment was a single-level unit with 2 cramped bedrooms, one for Olivia, one that Grace and Naomi shared. The living room doubled as a kitchen, separated only by a small counter lined with mismatched bowls and the kids' plastic cups. The heater rattled away, sending out enough warmth to chase off the chill from outside. Grace threw off her mittens and flopped onto the couch. Naomi hopped onto the armchair by the window, pressing her nose against the glass to watch the flurries outside. Olivia set her bags on the counter, carefully unloading what groceries Mia had salvaged. The twins' coats were still damp from melted snow, but for the moment she let them be. "Mommy, who was that man?" Grace asked suddenly, piping up from the couch. She was fiddling with a half-frozen shoelace on her boot, but her attention was fixed on Olivia. "He caught you when you slipped." Olivia forced a light shrug. "He's someone I used to know," she said gently. She held her daughter's gaze for a moment, then turned away to hide the flicker of emotion. The memory of Benjamin's expression, the shock, the fleeting care in his eyes, filled her with a swirl of relief and anger all at once. Naomi climbed off the chair and patted across the worn rug. "He was nice," she added. "He made sure you didn't fall." Olivia managed a small nod. She wished she had a better answer for them, some tidy explanation of who Benjamin was and what his sudden presence meant for their lives. But she had none. All she had was a pounding heart and 1,000 questions. She busied herself making quick sandwiches for the girls. They were easy to please, peanut butter for Grace, jelly for Naomi, though her mind was miles away, replaying the moment she locked eyes with Benjamin. It felt like staring into a mirror of the past, one that threatened to upend everything she'd built, precarious as it was. A soft knock at the door startled her. She hadn't expected Mia so soon, but when she opened up, her friend stood there, a bit out of breath, a plastic bag of dented cans in one hand. Mia had obviously rushed through the snowstorm to check on them. "I'm guessing you beat me home," she joked, stepping inside. Her boots left watery footprints on the floor. "Sorry about the groceries. A few things got banged up, but I think it's all salvageable." Olivia thanked her quietly, then started to speak, only to falter. Mia's eyes were searching hers, concern already etched into her features. "You okay?" she asked. I really don't know," Olivia admitted. She noticed the twins were occupied with their sandwiches, so she led Mia to the tiny kitchen corner. In a hushed voice, she continued, "It was Benjamin. I saw him across the street." Mia nodded, mouth slightly open, as if she expected no less. "And he saw you," she guessed, lowering her voice too. "Yes," Olivia said. "He even caught me when I slipped. It was too much, and I panicked." Mia reached out and squeezed Olivia's hand. "That must have been terrifying, and probably 100 other things at once. You want to talk about it?" Olivia cast a quick glance at Grace and Naomi, who were now whispering to each other on the couch. She turned back to Mia, voice shaky. "I don't even know what to say. How do I explain all this to them? And what if he really tries to be part of their lives? Am I ready for that?" "You've been handling everything alone for so long," Mia said softly. "Maybe talking to him wouldn't be the worst thing in the world." "I can't just open that door," Olivia replied. "Not without knowing what he really wants." Mia's expression was gentle. "You might need to find out, one way or another." After Mia left, Olivia felt more unsettled than before. She focused on tidying up the apartment, picking stray crayons off the floor and gathering the girls' scattered boots by the door. Grace and Naomi didn't ask more questions, satisfied for the moment with the knowledge that Mommy knew him once. But Olivia sensed their curiosity growing. She tucked them into their beds as midday passed into early evening, doing her best to keep the household calm. She couldn't settle her own mind, though. Every time she remembered Benjamin's startled, almost vulnerable look, a flurry of contradictory emotions seized her. She'd told herself for years that he was just a memory, a ghost from a time she had firmly locked away. Yet there he was, in flesh and blood, apparently more successful than ever. Did he even suspect that her girls were also his? She tried to distract herself with mundane tasks. She stood in front of the small closet that served as a laundry space, folding the girls' shirts and matching up their socks. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows. The flickering overhead bulb in the kitchen hummed softly, adding a quiet background to the storm in her head. Evening slipped in before she realized, and the sky turned a thick gray as more snow drifted down. She set out cereal for a simple dinner, since the day's chaos had sapped her energy for cooking anything elaborate. A draft forced its way under the front door, reminding her of the apartment's poor insulation. She adjusted a towel against the threshold to keep the chill at bay. That was when her phone buzzed. A text from Mia. "I heard from a co-worker that Benjamin's still in town, probably at the luxury hotel near the new conference center. Are you okay?" Olivia didn't reply right away. She pictured him in a plush suite, possibly rifling through documents for his big project. She imagined his phone lighting up as he debated calling her, though she had changed her number years ago. Maybe he was pacing around, trying to figure out how to find her. Or maybe, she thought bitterly, he was just continuing with his big business deals, unaffected by the storm he'd just stirred in her life. She forced herself to push the phone aside and focus on giving Grace and Naomi their bedtime routine. A storybook, a lullaby, and a tight hug were usually enough to lull them into dreamland, especially after a long day. Naomi requested a story about snowmen who come to life under moonlit skies. Grace demanded a second lullaby about snow fairies. As they drifted off, Olivia gently brushed their curls aside and kissed each forehead. For a moment, the hush of the room seemed to hold all that mattered in the world. Once they were asleep, Olivia retreated to her own room. She rummaged through a drawer where she kept receipts, old letters, and random keepsakes. She was searching for a heating pad to soothe her tense muscles, but found herself sifting through memories instead. Postcards from her late grandmother a faded carnival ticket from the day she met Benjamin, and eventually a small spiral-bound journal. She lifted the cover, flipping past pages of rambling thoughts she'd scrawled years ago. This was where she'd poured out her frustrations during the pregnancy, where she'd wrestled with the decision not to contact Benjamin after one too many unanswered messages. She paused when she reached a note she had never sent. The words jumped off the page as if begging for resolution. "I still love you, but I won't let you walk all over my heart. If you won't fight for us, I have to do it alone." Her hand trembled as she traced the ink. Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, a painful echo of how lost and lonely she'd felt back then. She pressed her palm against the old paper, as if seeking comfort from her younger self. That version of Olivia hadn't known how tough the coming years would be, but she also hadn't known she could be so strong. Looking at that note now, she realized she couldn't avoid him forever. Benjamin was here, in this very town, and she couldn't pretend he didn't exist. She owed it to herself, and maybe to Grace and Naomi, to let the truth come out no matter how messy it might be. Her heart pounded in her chest, the old fear colliding with a strange glimmer of hope. She clutched the note against her collarbone and closed her eyes, fighting a wave of conflicting emotions. How could she face him again after all this time? She pressed her lips together, determined to find a way. The half-formed plan gave her no comfort, but she knew running wasn't an option anymore. Not with Benjamin so close, and not with the girls asking questions. The apartment felt too quiet, the sounds of the city muffled by new-fallen snow. She listened to Grace and Naomi's peaceful breathing from the next room and promised herself she wouldn't let them down. Folding the note carefully into the journal, she held it tight, as though it were the only anchor she had. While flipping through an old journal, Olivia found a note she once wrote to Benjamin, never sent. She clutched it, heart pounding, knowing she could no longer avoid him. Olivia stirred awake in the dim half-light, the note she'd found the previous night still clutched in her hand. She looked at it, heart heavy with unspoken questions, before slipping it into the bedside drawer. The apartment was quiet. Grace and Naomi were sound asleep, soft breaths audible behind their shared bedroom door. Outside, the sky was tinted a pale blue, hinting at another long day in the snow-covered mountains. As much as she craved a few more moments under the blankets, Olivia knew she had too many obligations. She showered quickly, steeling herself for her shift at the ski resort. The previous day's encounter with Benjamin lingered, a persistent ache at the back of her mind. She moved carefully around the small kitchen, packing lunches for the twins and making sure their boots and mittens were lined up by the door. When Grace and Naomi finally tumbled out of bed, hair tousled and eyes bright, Olivia greeted them with gentle smiles and a quick breakfast of warm oatmeal. Their giggles felt like a reprieve from the anxieties swirling inside her. She reminded them to bundle up for the snow, all the while pushing thoughts of Benjamin into a mental corner, determined to get through the day without letting him derail her focus. Meanwhile, across town, Benjamin straightened his tie in front of a sleek bathroom mirror. He was staying in one of the resort's finest suites, a perk of his status as a major investor. Any other morning he would have taken pride in the commanding view of the pristine slopes from his room, but now even the spectacular scenery couldn't dislodge the thoughts racing through his head. He had come here to finalize a massive hotel project, yet he found his mind drifting back to Olivia and the possibility that he was a father. Shaking off the lingering disbelief, he turned his attention to the day's business demands. Two key investors, men known for their impatience and love of profit, were waiting in the hotel lobby with documents that needed his swift approval. By the time Olivia arrived at the resort's slopeside cafe, the place was already buzzing with early morning tourists. She slipped into her apron, glancing around at the lively scene, families in puffy coats hunting for hot cocoa, seasoned skiers discussing weather reports, and staff members chatting in hushed tones about a big investor group rumored to be touring the property today. Olivia's boss had dropped a stern memo earlier, urging everyone to be on their best behavior. The entire resort hinged on keeping these investors happy. The cafe's register dinged repeatedly as a line formed. Olivia dove into work, greeting customers, pouring coffee, and filling pastry bags. Yet, even with the flurry of activity, she couldn't entirely shut out the nagging thought that Benjamin might appear at any moment. Grace and Naomi were outside, building small snowmen near the beginner's slope under Mia's watchful eye. Every few minutes, Olivia spotted them through the cafe's glass window, patting snow into place. Their giggles, muffled by the glass, still warmed her heart. Amid the swirl of guests and rushing staff, that little glimpse of innocence brought a momentary calm to Olivia's day. Then she saw Benjamin, standing just outside with a small entourage. He was deep in conversation with two men in crisp suits, likely the investors she had heard about. Olivia felt her cheeks flush with that same surge of emotions she'd experienced on the street. Benjamin's eyes drifted toward the cafe window, and for a split second, they locked gazes. He made an almost imperceptible move, as though he wanted to step inside and speak to her, but he was quickly corralled by one of the suited men, who directed him toward the resort manager's office. Olivia released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She focused on a demanding customer who was rattling off an order for multiple specialty lattes. With a practiced smile, she punched everything into the register, then stepped aside to prepare the drinks. Foam hissed from the machine, drowning out the chatter around her. But a new tension hung in the air. Rumors were flying that the big contract signing might happen today. Staff members wearing neat black uniforms shuffled quickly between the cafe and a private conference room. The swirl of commerce and corporate expectation was palpable. At one point, a sudden hush fell over the cafe. Olivia glanced up to see Benjamin and his entourage entering. He scanned the room, looking both determined and uncertain, until his eyes landed on Olivia behind the counter. The tension between them felt thick enough to slice. She tried to remain professional, finishing her current order and handing it off to the customer with a polite nod. But her heart drummed against her ribs. Benjamin approached the counter. "Good morning," he said, voice low. "I was hoping we could—" He didn't finish. Olivia's boss chose that moment to appear in the background, calling her name sharply. "I need you to come help with the catering station," he announced, tone clipped. There was no chance to talk, no room for personal matters in this environment. Benjamin opened his mouth to protest, but one of his own investors touched his arm, beckoning him aside with a pointed look at their waiting documents. In the shuffle, they barely managed to exchange more than a few words. Olivia picked up an open tray of pastries and gave a quick nod to him. "I have to work," she whispered apologetically, then disappeared through the swinging door into the resort's back corridor. She felt simultaneously disappointed and relieved not to dive into that conversation right then. Meanwhile, Mia noticed the small commotion from her vantage point outside. She gently took Grace and Naomi by the hand, leading them inside for a promised hot chocolate. The girls were rosy-cheeked from the cold, excitedly chattering about the little snowmen they had sculpted. As they entered the warm cafe, Naomi spotted Benjamin near the counter. She gave a shy wave, her breath hitching as though she instinctively recognized something about him. Benjamin turned, a soft smile ghosting across his face. His gaze shifted from one girl to the other, and the resemblance struck him harder than before. In Naomi, he caught the echo of his own eyes. In Grace, a playful tilt to her smile that felt achingly familiar. For a moment, he seemed to forget the high-stakes meeting. The investor at his side cleared his throat impatiently, reminding Benjamin that time was ticking. Soon, he was ushered to a long table in the nearby conference room, where a spread of pastries and a coffee station awaited them. Contracts lay open, bold legal text promising millions of dollars if everything went smoothly. Yet Benjamin's concentration wavered, thoughts drifting to what lay just beyond those glass walls, a pair of little girls who might be his own. The morning wore on, and Olivia found herself juggling tasks all over the resort. She delivered thermoses of coffee to staff, rearranged pastries for the incoming lunch crowd, and helped coordinate a small buffet for the visiting VIPs. Each time she thought she might catch a breather, someone would call her name. She had come to dread any mention of Miss Parker, since it usually meant more work. Still, she needed the hours. She had rent to pay and twins to feed. During a brief lull, she overheard a couple of co-workers discussing an elaborate event planned for the evening, an investment gala in the newly built conference center. The entire affair, from the ice sculptures to the string quartet, was financed by Benjamin's company. Her ears perked up at the mention of his name, and she caught snippets about a big signing ceremony. Yet, no one knew for sure if it would happen that night or if negotiations would drag on. As she pretended to straighten a small tower of dessert plates, she felt a pinch of anxiety. Even if he wanted to talk to her, how would it ever fit into the swirl of business deals and lavish events? Another wave of customers flooded the cafe, giving Olivia no time to reflect. She rushed to fill orders, smiling politely at the animated tourists recounting their morning adventures on the slopes. By the time the line began to dwindle again, she spotted Benjamin slipping outside, coat draped over his arm, phone pressed to his ear. He looked tense, brow furrowed. A staff member quickly intercepted him, directing him toward a small group of local reporters waiting to catch a statement about the prospective deal. Olivia sighed, leaning briefly against the wall behind the register. She could still feel the adrenaline thrumming through her veins. He had come so close to speaking to her, but once again, their worlds had collided and pushed them apart. Inside her chest, the old mixture of longing and resentment coiled tightly. She fiddled with her apron, trying to refocus on her job rather than the complicated man who suddenly dominated her thoughts. After a moment, she gave herself a mental shake and stepped out for a short break in the staff corridor. The resort buzzed all around her, but the corridor was cooler and quieter. She leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to her forehead. Her heart still raced, remembering the look on Benjamin's face earlier in the cafe. A memory flickered. Years ago, he had worn that same worried expression whenever he was torn between ambition and their relationship. She had hoped time might have changed him, or at least that the old uncertainties would fade away. Instead, everything felt raw, as if they were stuck in the same painful dance. She rubbed her eyes, struggling to compose herself. In a few minutes, she'd have to return to the front lines, serving hot drinks and forcing a smile for the guests. When her break ended, she slipped back into the crowded cafeteria, weaving around employees and guests. She managed to avoid another direct encounter with Benjamin, though she glimpsed him once in the distance, leaning in to speak with the resort manager, who nodded gravely. Rumor had it that a major announcement might happen that evening, something that could reshape the entire town. At last, the midday rush subsided, and Olivia retreated to the employee locker area. She was exhausted, more from emotional turmoil than physical labor. Her feet ached, but it was her thoughts that weighed her down. She opened her locker to grab her water bottle and discovered an envelope resting on top of her spare sweater. It was a formal cream-colored envelope with a neat, elegant seal. She glanced around, half expecting someone to pop out and explain. But the locker room was nearly empty, only the muffled echo of footsteps outside in the hallway. With shaky hands, Olivia slid a finger under the flap and took out a shiny invite. The words were printed in crisp gold lettering, inviting her to an investment gala that evening at the newly unveiled conference center. And there, in a neat script at the bottom, stood Benjamin's name, as if personally extending the invitation. She stared at the invitation in disbelief. After the chaos of the day, this was the last thing she expected. The note was brief, but it conveyed just enough warmth to hint that Benjamin wanted her to attend. Her heart pounded, questions rushing in. Why now? Was this some formal attempt to talk, or a way to keep her silent in front of potential investors? Did he truly want her there, or was he just hoping to tie up loose ends? In that moment, she recalled Grace and Naomi's bright faces when they mentioned the nice man who helped Mommy. She thought about the ghost of something unspoken lingering in Benjamin's eyes whenever he glanced at the twins. Whatever tonight had in store, she couldn't avoid it anymore. She clutched the envelope, uncertain but strangely resolved. Back in her locker at the resort, Olivia receives a formal invitation to the investment gala that evening, courtesy of Benjamin himself. Olivia stood in her living room, the invitation still in her hands. The paper felt heavier than it looked, as though it carried all the weight of the past she'd tried to leave behind. She turned it over, rereading the details of the event. A festive gala in the newly opened conference center, complete with music, cocktails, and presumably a swarm of important people eager to finalize the long-rumored investment deal. That Benjamin's name was written so neatly at the bottom sent a shiver through her. She glanced at Grace and Naomi as they sat on the floor with their crayons, happily coloring a picture of a snowman family. Olivia's heart clenched. Maybe this was the chance, or confrontation, she couldn't avoid anymore. When Mia dropped by with groceries later, Olivia hesitated, then handed her the invitation. "He wants me to come," she said quietly. "It's tonight." Mia studied the card. "Seems pretty formal," she observed. "You going?" "I'm not sure," Olivia admitted, "but maybe I owe it to myself to show up. He needs to see the truth about our life. She paused, her voice wavering. "I don't have anything decent to wear. It's going to be fancy, right?" Mia smiled, eyes dancing with encouragement. "I have a pair of black heels that might fit you, and you still have that old dress, right? The blue one you always said was your special occasion dress?" "It's torn at the hem," Olivia said. "I haven't worn it in ages." "I bet a few stitches would fix it," Mia replied, passing her a small sewing kit from her bag. "You can do this. And don't worry about the twins. I'll watch them. We'll make popcorn and watch holiday cartoons. You go see what he wants." Olivia swallowed, nodding slowly. The idea of stepping into a lavish gala made her palms sweat, but she steeled herself. Benjamin's invitation was clear. He wanted her there, possibly to talk, possibly for something else. She still couldn't fully trust his motives, but maybe it was time to find out. That afternoon, while the twins watched a movie in the next room, Olivia carefully laid her dress out on the bed. A tiny tear along the bottom seam had grown more ragged over time. She threaded a needle and set to work, hands trembling from nerves rather than difficulty. Each precise stitch felt like a promise to herself to face whatever the night would bring. As dusk settled, Olivia changed into the newly mended dress. The once vibrant blue had faded slightly, but it still hugged her figure in a way that gave her a hint of confidence. Mia arrived with a pair of borrowed shoes, a little higher than Olivia was used to, but she slipped them on, trying a few tentative steps. When Grace and Naomi saw her dressed up, they gasped and grinned. "Mommy, you look like a princess," Naomi exclaimed, her eyes shining. Heat rose to Olivia's cheeks. "I'm just going to a party," she murmured. "You two be good for Mia, okay?" Grace nodded, determined. "We will." Mia ushered the girls into the kitchen to pick out snacks, giving Olivia a moment alone. She glanced one last time at her reflection in the mirror near the front door. She felt both older and younger in that moment. Older because of the burdens she'd carried since she last wore this dress. Younger because of the thrill and uncertainty swirling in her chest. The conference center near the resort was ablaze with light when she arrived. Golden glow spilled from tall windows, and the discreet sound of music filtered out each time someone opened the glass doors to enter. Snow had started falling again, dusting the pavement in a white sheen. Olivia hesitated at the entrance, mustering the courage to push forward. Inside, the transformation was breathtaking. Evergreen garlands twinkled with tiny lights, and red ribbons draped the banisters leading to the grand ballroom. A tall Christmas tree dominated the center of the lobby, ornaments catching the shimmer of the chandeliers overhead. Guests milled about in elegant evening wear. The smell of spiced cider and pine seemed to hover in the warm air. Olivia recognized a few resort employees balancing trays of champagne flutes, weaving through the crowd with practiced ease. She felt a pang at how out of place she must look, but she squared her shoulders and took a few steps forward. At first, she didn't see Benjamin. Local politicians and prominent business owners were busy shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries. A string quartet played softly in a corner, the music mingling with the gentle hum of conversation. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest, each note seeming to punctuate the tension inside her. Then she spotted him. He stood by a cluster of dignitaries, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, his hair combed neatly. He scanned the crowd with a certain restless urgency, as though searching for someone in particular. Olivia hesitated, half of her wanting to turn and escape, but before she could, Benjamin noticed her. Their eyes locked, and she felt time slow to a hush around them. He excused himself from the group and walked across the marble floor to meet her near the towering Christmas tree. Up close, she could see the flicker of uncertainty in his expression. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. She nodded, suddenly unsure how to begin. "It's quite a place," she managed, gesturing at the glittering scene. "Yeah, it's a little overwhelming," he admitted, glancing around. "And I wanted to talk to you, away from the noise if possible." Before Olivia could respond, a man with a clipped accent approached, Benjamin's associate. He wore a polite smile but seemed impatient. "Benjamin, the investors want a quick word. They're eager to finalize some details before the presentation starts." Benjamin half turned, a look of annoyance crossing his face. "I'll be there in a moment," he said, then focused back on Olivia. "Will you wait for me? I really do want to talk." Olivia nodded again, feeling vaguely relieved he still had a professional obligation. It gave her a chance to steady herself. She found a seat near the ballroom's arched windows, watching the swirl of gowns and suits. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of Benjamin across the room, deep in conversation with individuals who radiated wealth and influence. Eventually, Benjamin reappeared beside her. "Let's step away," he suggested, gently guiding her through a side door into a quieter hallway. The contrast was immediate. No music, no buzz of conversation, just a soft hush broken by their own hesitant footsteps. "Tell me about the girls," he said, voice low and urgent. Am I?" Olivia's throat tightened. She felt strangely vulnerable in her old dress. "I never intended to keep them from you," she said. "After we lost touch, you seemed so focused on your career. I tried to reach out, but—" She trailed off, remembering the unanswered messages, the sense of isolation she'd felt back then. Benjamin exhaled slowly, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I had no idea," he murmured. "Things were hectic, and I got pulled in 100 directions, but still I should have made sure. You were everything to me once, and I just let you slip away." There was a raw intensity in his voice. For a moment, Olivia saw the younger man she'd known years ago, back when their future seemed bright and unburdened. She hesitated before replying. "Grace and Naomi are my whole life. If you really are their father, I don't want them to get hurt. So if you're here just to check a box, or out of guilt—" He cut in gently. "I'm not. I need to know them. I need to know you again, too." His earnest tone gave her a flicker of cautious hope, but also stirred the anger and pain she'd carried. She folded her arms. "You want proof, don't you? A test to make sure." Benjamin hesitated. "If it settles the question, yes. I don't doubt you, but the circumstances— I've been told by my investor partners that I need clarity just in case." Olivia's face hardened. "So this is about your business deal, isn't it?" "No," he insisted, though his expression betrayed the conflict boiling inside him. "I can handle them, but I have to be sure. This isn't about money or reputation, it's about righting a wrong, maybe." Her pride flared up. "Well, it sure feels like you're treating the girls like a liability that needs confirming." Benjamin pinched the bridge of his nose, regret shadowing his features. I don't mean to. I just don't know what else to do. This turned my world upside down. Olivia swallowed hard. You're not the only one whose world turned upside down, she said quietly. A brief silence settled between them. Then the sound of an opening door broke the moment. A local reporter stepped in, camera at the ready, apparently on the prowl for a scoop. He raised his lens, suspicious eyes flicking from Benjamin to Olivia. Oh, there you are, Mr. the reporter began, but before he could finish, Benjamin shot him a sharp look. We're having a private conversation, Benjamin said coolly. The reporter refused to back off. He turned to Olivia. You're not an investor, are you? Word is you've been seen with him around the resort. Care to comment on your relationship? Olivia froze, feeling exposed. She hated the intrusive stare of the camera. Benjamin moved swiftly, stepping in front of her to block the lens. No comment, he snapped. His protective gesture sent a wave of gratitude through Olivia, mingling with her frustrations. The reporter grumbled something about public interest before slinking away, apparently recognizing he wasn't getting a story without security intervening. Benjamin turned back to her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. I'm sorry. Are you all right? She nodded, avoiding his gaze for a moment. The warmth of his hand was disconcerting, but also strangely comforting. I'm okay. That's just not something I'm used to, she said, her voice subdued. The echo of holiday music drifted through the corridor, signaling that events in the main ballroom were resuming. Benjamin's phone buzzed in his pocket. Undoubtedly, the investors were summoning him back. I don't want this to end here, he said, letting his hand fall. Can we talk again soon? Away from cameras or anyone else? Olivia hesitated, still torn between her lingering anger and the faint spark of possibility. Maybe, she answered at last, but I need time. Benjamin nodded, understanding etched into his features. He glanced down at his phone, face falling slightly at the message that must have flashed on the screen. I have to go, he murmured. I'm sorry. Together, they walked back into the ballroom. The brightness of the chandeliers and the swirl of music felt jarring compared to the quiet corridor. Dozens of well-dressed attendees moved around them, glasses clinking, voices humming. Without another word, Benjamin slipped into the crowd, heading toward a stage at the front where his investors waited. Olivia took a moment to gather herself near the refreshment table, her heart pounding like a drum. She stayed just long enough to catch her breath, then decided it was time to leave. The conversation with Benjamin was fresh in her mind, each word resonating in the pit of her stomach. Grace and Naomi were waiting at home, and this glittering world of champagne and deals wasn't hers. It never had been. Clutching her coat around her shoulders, she slipped out a side entrance. The night air was shockingly cold, snowflakes tumbling in the dim light. She pulled the coat tighter against the wind, stepping carefully along a shoveled path that led back to the parking lot. Her mind raced with conflicting emotions, relief at escaping the gala's intensity, dread of what would happen next, and a fragile hope that maybe she and Benjamin could find some common ground. As she walked past a large window facing the street, she glanced back into the ballroom's glow. Through the falling snow, she saw Benjamin staring after her, sadness and determination mingling on his face. Olivia awoke before sunrise, the apartment still swathed in dim gray light. Her shoulders ached from restless tossing and turning all night, replaying every second of the gala in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of Benjamin's eyes, earnest, uncertain, nor the weight of his words about wanting to know Grace and Naomi. The scent of brewing coffee drifted from the kitchen, where Mia was already stirring creamer into a mug. Mia had stayed overnight on the couch, worried Olivia might need someone to talk to. But Olivia had spent most of the night in a tangle of thoughts and emotions too complex to untangle in a quick conversation. Now the new day felt like stepping onto a tightrope she wasn't sure she could navigate. "Morning," Mia said softly. She pushed a fresh cup of coffee toward Olivia and set a hand gently on her friend's arm. "How are you feeling?" "Like my head's about to explode," Olivia admitted, "but I have to go to work." "You sure you don't want me to open for you at the cafe?" Mia asked, worry lining her forehead. She often covered for Olivia when times were hard, but Olivia shook her head. "I'll be okay," she said. "The ski resort opens early, and my boss already has me on the schedule. If I don't show, he'll find any excuse to trim my hours." Mia sighed, understanding. Both knew how tenuous Olivia's job could be. Not wanting to risk that, Olivia quickly changed into her uniform, found her thick winter coat, and gathered her things. The twins, still curled in their blankets, slept soundly in the next room. Olivia felt a pang at leaving them, but hoped the day would pass smoothly enough for her to come home early. She trudged through the apartment complex's quiet hallway and out into the cold dawn. A crisp wind nipped at her cheeks, turning them rosy before she even reached the street. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, powdery drifts making the sidewalks slippery. She moved with careful steps, breath forming little clouds in front of her. Every so often, her mind flashed back to the moment she'd locked eyes with Benjamin in the ballroom corridor. He had looked so vulnerable, torn between his million-dollar deals and the sudden possibility of fatherhood. It made her chest tighten to think of it. As she neared the resort's main building, a bright hush hung over the morning slopes. Families dressed in neon snowsuits huddled in line for lift tickets, chattering excitedly about the fresh powder. Young children bounced on their toes, eager to get on the bunny slopes. It was a peaceful, promising scene, one Olivia appreciated most mornings, but today her nerves felt frayed. She slipped into the resort's employee entrance and hung her coat in a cramped locker. Her boss had assigned her to the front desk in the main lobby for a few hours before she'd head to the cafe. The lobby was already bustling with early arrivals checking in, bellhops wheeling luggage, and staff handing out trail maps. Trying to steady herself, Olivia took her place behind the front desk, forcing a polite smile at the next guest in line. The morning wore on in a flurry of activity, printing room keys, answering questions about ski lessons, directing new arrivals to the rental shop. But beneath her professional facade, she felt on edge. She caught stray mentions of Benjamin's name from guests who bragged about seeing him around the resort, though she tried to block it out and focus on her job. Then, just after she finished helping a family check in, she glanced up and saw him. Benjamin stood in the middle of the lobby, scanning the crowd as though searching for something or someone. His appearance sent whispers rippling among staff and guests alike. He was famous enough for word to spread quickly. The big-shot millionaire behind the resort's future expansion had shown up unannounced. Olivia's heart lurched. She turned slightly, pretending to busy herself with a stack of brochures, but it was too late. Benjamin caught sight of her behind the desk. He offered a small, tentative smile and headed her way, parting the sea of curious onlookers like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hi," he said quietly when he reached the desk. He seemed almost shy, a stark contrast to the commanding presence she'd seen the night before. Her throat felt tight. "Morning," she replied, mind racing. She took a breath and tried to steady her hands on the desk's smooth surface. "You're here early." He nodded. "I couldn't sleep, and I needed to talk to you." A hush seemed to fall around them, as though everyone in the lobby had tuned into the tension. Olivia looked over Benjamin's shoulder, spotting co-workers exchanging wide-eyed glances. She knew exactly what they were thinking. Why was the biggest investor in the region seeking out an ordinary resort employee this way? Before she could respond, Benjamin quietly added, "I want to help with the twins, Olivia. I know it might be complicated, but let me do something for you. Something for them." Her pulse kicked up again. She scanned his face, searching for any hint of insincerity. "I don't even know what that means," she whispered. "This all happened so fast." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I just want to make it right. I have resources I can—" "Olivia!" a sharp voice interrupted. The resort manager, flanked by a junior supervisor, was marching across the lobby, annoyance evident in his furrowed brows. "I need you in my office." Without waiting for a reply, he turned on his heel, expecting her to follow. Olivia pressed her lips together, tossing a helpless glance at Benjamin before hurrying after her boss. Behind closed doors, the manager wasted no time. "Can you explain why you're distracting one of our most important investors in the lobby?" he demanded, folding his arms. I wasn't distracting anyone," Olivia stammered. "He came to speak with me." The manager's gaze was stern. "I need this resort to run smoothly. No scandals, no personal drama. If whatever this is becomes a problem, we'll have to reassess your employment here." Mia, who'd been finishing a different task nearby, slipped into the office, defending Olivia. "This is unfair," she said, her voice firm. "She's doing her job. It's not her fault if an investor wants to talk to her." The manager waved a dismissive hand. "I can't afford negative publicity right now. We're on the verge of a major deal. I need staff focused on customer service, not personal issues." Olivia clenched her fists, anger and humiliation clashing in her chest. "My personal life isn't interfering with my work," she managed. "Is it so wrong that he spoke to me?" The manager pursed his lips. "If you want to keep your job, stay away from him when you're on the clock." Mia opened her mouth to protest, but the manager walked out, leaving them standing there. Olivia felt her cheeks burn. She hated the insinuation that she was causing problems by simply existing in the same space as Benjamin. As she left the office, Benjamin appeared at the end of the corridor. Clearly, he'd overheard part of the confrontation. His brow furrowed. "Is everything all right?" Mia shot him a look of exasperation. "Apparently, you're quite the distraction." Olivia stepped closer to him. "My boss basically told me to keep my distance." A frustrated spark lit Benjamin's eyes. "That's ridiculous. I wasn't—" He stopped abruptly, seeing two resort employees walk by, openly eavesdropping. Lowering his voice, he said, "I'm sorry you're being put in this position." Olivia shrugged, trying to hide how shaken she felt. "It's fine. I just can't afford any more trouble. I have 2 kids to feed." "Speaking of which," Mia chimed in, "the twins just finished a little skiing lesson outside. They're asking for hot chocolate." She glanced at Olivia. "You want me to bring them in?" Olivia hesitated, then sighed. "Go ahead." A few minutes later, Mia returned, guiding Grace and Naomi along the corridor. The girls wore bright, puffy jackets dusted with snow, and each clutched a small ski helmet under one arm. Their cheeks glowed red from the cold. The moment they spotted Benjamin, they broke into wide smiles, as though recognizing a favorite neighbor. Naomi tugged at Olivia's sleeve, pointing. "That's the man who helped you when you fell." Benjamin lowered himself to their eye level, offering a kind smile. "Hi there. How were your ski lessons?" Naomi beamed. "So fun. I only fell once." Grace nodded, stepping closer. "Is it true you're a friend of Mommy's?" she asked boldly. Benjamin glanced up at Olivia, hesitating for just a second. "I'm trying to be," he said gently. A small swirl of confusion and hope flickered in Olivia's chest as she watched the exchange. The twins were so unguarded, their curiosity shining through. Seeing Benjamin kneeling there, offering them the warmth of his smile, made her ache with 1,000 unasked questions. The corridor filled with the murmur of passing guests, but it felt like a private bubble around them. Benjamin listened attentively as Grace and Naomi described their skiing adventures, nodding and adding little words of praise. Their bright laughter and his gentle encouragement created a scene that both comforted Olivia and left her uncertain. A faint shuffle caught her attention. The resort manager stood at the end of the hallway, arms folded, watching them with thinly veiled impatience. It was enough to make Olivia's stomach drop. She knew she was on thin ice. Sensing the tension, Benjamin stood and offered his hand to the twins. "Would you like some hot chocolate?" "My treat." Grace and Naomi's eyes lit up, but Olivia placed a cautious hand on Grace's shoulder. She worried about drawing more of her boss's ire. Yet, as she looked up at Benjamin, Something in his expression told her he truly wanted a moment to show he cared, not just about the contract he was signing, but about them. Mia broke the brief silence. "I can get them hot chocolate," she said, glancing at Olivia for permission. "Sure," Olivia managed. "That'd be great." She expected Benjamin to follow Mia to the cafe, but he stayed beside Olivia, watching the twins scamper down the corridor with excited giggles. "I want to fix this," he said quietly, looking at her with a mixture of determination and regret. "I won't let your boss bully you because of me." "It's complicated," Olivia replied, folding her arms to steady herself. "He's worried about the resort's image. I don't exactly get a say." Benjamin's jaw tensed. "I'll talk to him if I have to." "Don't," Olivia said quickly. "That might make it worse. I need this job." He nodded, studying her face. "Then let's find a way to talk outside of work so I'm not causing you trouble." Before she could respond, Grace and Naomi came bounding back, each holding a small paper cup topped with whipped cream. They tugged on Benjamin's coat, wide smiles on their faces. He glanced down at them, his expression softening instantly. "Can we sit somewhere?" Grace asked innocently, pulling at his sleeve. Naomi nodded, cradling her cup carefully. "We can tell you about the snowmen we made." Their excitement was contagious, and Olivia found herself torn between wanting to protect them from a complicated world and wanting them to have a relationship with their father, if he truly was their father. Benjamin knelt again, meeting their gazes. He opened his mouth to answer, but his words caught in his throat. Instead, he looked up at Olivia, silently asking for permission. Her heart felt heavy and light at the same time. She gave the faintest nod, even as her mind swirled with unspoken warnings about her boss. It was Grace who broke the moment with a tug on Benjamin's coat sleeve, giggling as whipped cream smeared across her nose. In that instant, an unspoken bond seemed to stretch between them, delicate but real. Benjamin cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. He settled for a quiet question, voice thick with the enormity of what needed to be said. "Can we find a moment to talk about everything?" Thick gray clouds gathered over the mountain peaks, promising the kind of storm that sent even seasoned locals rushing to stock up on groceries. Olivia felt a distinct heaviness in the air as she pushed open the resort's side door, bracing herself against a sudden gust of wind. Dusk wasn't far off, and the darkening sky made the ski lodge's lights seem brighter than usual. Each glowing window felt like a beacon against the swirling threat of an oncoming blizzard. Inside the bustling lobby, murmurs of concern passed between guests and staff. People exchanged worried glances while scanning weather apps on their phones. A local radio broadcast, piped softly through the resort's overhead speakers, warned of a possible whiteout and advised travelers to leave town if they could. The sense of uneasy anticipation was as unmistakable as the chill seeping through every crack. Olivia set her shoulders and made for the staff corridor, trying to block out her own anxieties. The previous days had brought enough turmoil already. Her boss had made it clear that personal drama was unwelcome here, and Benjamin's presence had stirred up more rumors than she could manage. Now, with the looming storm threatening to cancel all holiday events, it felt like her world was balancing on a knife's edge. She paused near a bulletin board pinned with staff memos. A new flyer reminded employees that the resort would remain open as long as conditions allowed. Her eyes flicked over the bold text. Limited staff may be required to stay on site for emergency coverage. That could mean an overnight shift at the lodge for her, and no guarantee she'd even be paid extra. As she stood there, lost in worry, the door to the manager's office swung open. He spotted her immediately and beckoned her inside. The tension in his stance signaled this was no casual chat. Olivia's stomach knotted with dread. She followed him into the cramped office, where he shut the door behind her with a quiet click. "I'm sure you've heard about this storm," he began, folding his arms. "Worst timing for us. We've got a major investor group in town expecting everything to run smoothly for their last site visit." Olivia nodded, waiting for the inevitable. He exhaled sharply. Word is traveling fast about your situation. We can't afford negative press. The paparazzi have already snapped pictures of you and that investor, Benjamin, chatting in the corridor, and folks are starting to whisper about kids and paternity rumors. Her cheeks burned. That's my personal business, she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. It doesn't affect how I do my job. He lifted an eyebrow. Our image is everything right now. If the investors catch wind of scandal, it could jeopardize the entire expansion. I need you to think carefully about whether you want to stay here or— You're telling me to quit, she interrupted, feeling both anger and disbelief bubble up. The manager spread his hands, a gesture that feigned sympathy. I'm telling you to consider what's best for everyone. We can't have distractions. For a moment, Olivia couldn't speak. She'd worked so hard to keep a low profile, to raise Grace and Naomi without causing a stir. And now her entire livelihood teetered on the edge because the father of her children had reappeared and set tongues wagging. She fought the urge to snap back that it wasn't her fault, that she never wanted this kind of attention. But she knew it wouldn't make a difference. The manager's mind was made up. I have 2 children to support, she said quietly, anger giving way to desperation. I can't just walk away from this job. He sighed as though inconvenienced. We'll see how this storm pans out, he replied, softening his tone minimally. If you can keep your personal issues from affecting our operation, we'll reassess. But if things get messy— He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Fighting back tears of frustration, Olivia left the office. Her head pounded with the injustice of it. Outside, the wind had picked up, howling past the windows like an angry animal. She slipped through the staff corridor, ignoring the concerned looks from co-workers. Somewhere deep down, she hoped this storm wouldn't be as bad as predicted. She needed time to figure out her next move, time to decide what to do about Benjamin. When she reached the staff lounge, she found Mia waiting anxiously. I heard, her friend said softly, reading Olivia's face. They're threatening your job? Olivia nodded, voice low. Apparently my life is too controversial for a ski resort. That's ridiculous, Mia muttered. What about him? Benjamin? Why is it all on you? Olivia shook her head, sinking into a folding chair. Because he's the one with all the money, she said bitterly, and I'm just an employee who might tarnish their pristine image. Mia rubbed her back in gentle circles. We'll figure something out. Don't give up. As if summoned by the tension in the air, the door opened and Benjamin appeared. He'd obviously been looking for Olivia. The relief in his eyes when he spotted her confirmed it. Mia glared at him, arms crossed. Before Mia could speak, Olivia rose and gestured for her friend to give them a moment. Benjamin wore a dark coat buttoned tight, flakes of snow dusting his shoulders. His gaze flicked around the lounge, then settled on Olivia. I just talked to my investor group, he began, voice thick with frustration. They're hearing rumors that I have 2 daughters hidden away somewhere, and it's causing them concerns about the project's public image. Sounds familiar, Olivia said sharply, bitterness creeping in. My boss basically gave me an ultimatum. Benjamin's jaw clenched. This is getting out of control. If they'd just let me handle things quietly. Quietly? Olivia repeated, letting out a mirthless laugh. My life has been anything but quiet since you showed up. He winced. I know, and I'm sorry. I never wanted you to get caught in the crossfire. She studied him, torn between anger and the flicker of sympathy in his eyes. I'm at risk of losing my job. My daughter's security is on the line. I'll help you, he said quickly. Financially, whatever you need. But the offer made her bristle. I don't need a handout, she snapped. I need stability and respect, not hush money. He fell silent, hurt evident in his gaze. Outside, the windows rattled under another gust of wind. Snow battered the glass in a shifting white curtain. A voice crackled through the overhead speakers, announcing that the nearby roads were slowly closing due to accumulating drifts. The storm was rolling in faster than expected. Benjamin took a steadying breath. "We can't talk here. Let's meet after you finish your shift, away from all these prying eyes." "And if my boss sees us?" she asked, half laughing at the absurdity. "He'll have me packing by morning." He hesitated. "Give me your phone number, or I can give you mine. We'll talk when you're away from this place." She eyed him warily but pulled a small scrap of paper from her apron pocket. She scribbled her number, the pen trembling in her hand, then handed it over. "Don't make me regret this." A hint of relief washed over his features. "I won't." He stuffed the paper into his coat and stepped back. "I'll head out now before more rumors spark up. Please, stay safe in this storm." Olivia nodded, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to believe in his willingness to fix everything. Another part of her feared that, in his attempts to keep the deal afloat, he'd turn her life upside down all over again. By late afternoon, the resort staff was in near panic mode. The forecast promised an unprecedented snowfall, and guests scrambled to confirm their travel plans. Some braved the roads to leave while they could. Others resigned themselves to waiting out the blizzard in their hotel rooms. Olivia, stuck at the front desk once more, handled an onslaught of complaints and pleas for help booking flights. Mia made rounds, delivering complimentary cocoa to shivering visitors who'd come in from the cold. Each time she passed by, she squeezed Olivia's arm in silent encouragement. The lobby felt stifling, and overhead lights flickered occasionally in response to the fierce winds rattling the building's frame. Phones rang off the hook with people checking cancellations. Olivia, swallowing her own fears, did her best to help guests, forcing a helpful smile each time. All the while, the threat of losing her job gnawed at her. As darkness fell, the radio updates turned ominous. Meteorologists warned that the blizzard could close all roads by midnight. Olivia pictured Grace and Naomi at home, warm and safe with Mia, and prayed the power wouldn't go out. She wrapped up the last of her front desk duties, then hurried to clock out. If she didn't leave soon, she might be stranded at the resort. She stepped outside, almost losing her breath as the wind pummeled her. Snow whipped across the lot, piling in drifts taller than car bumpers. Overhead, the streetlights revealed endless sheets of white, swirling into near-zero visibility. She fumbled for her keys, fingers numb in seconds. As she forced her car door open against the wind, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She grabbed it, heart jumping when she saw Benjamin's name flash on the screen. He was calling. For a moment she hesitated, uncertain whether to accept it. On the other side of town, Benjamin stood at his hotel window, watching the storm roll in, phone in hand. He hesitated, then pressed the call button. Olivia's breath caught when she recognized his number. She answered, voice shaky with cold and nerves. He said, "Are you all right? Did you make it home?" She clenched the phone, eyes squeezed shut. Ice pricked at her cheeks. "Not yet, but I'm heading that way." Her voice quivered. "Benjamin, this storm, it's changing everything. We need to talk, now." A raw wind battered the walls of Olivia's modest apartment, rattling the window panes as she lowered her phone and pressed it against her chest. The blizzard outside had become a full-on siege, whiting out the streets and piling snowdrifts against shuttered storefronts. She peered through the frosted window in the living room and saw nothing but swirling white. Even the silhouettes of the neighboring buildings were drowned in the storm's fury. Moments earlier, she had been outside in her car, struggling to navigate the treacherous roads, when Benjamin's call came through. Now her pulse still thudded with a mix of relief and dread. The roads were nearly impassable, plows were overwhelmed, and emergency broadcasts urged everyone to stay put. She had no idea where else Benjamin could go under these conditions. Against her better judgment, and because she couldn't imagine him stuck in this whiteout, she had offered him shelter. Adjusting the blanket draped around her shoulders, she turned toward Grace and Naomi, who were perched on the couch, eyes wide as they listened to the howling wind. they clutched their favorite plush toys, expressions half fearful, half excited by the novelty of such an extreme storm. Olivia smoothed back a stray curl from Naomi's forehead, managing a reassuring smile. "We'll be all right," she promised, though her voice trembled slightly. Mia, who'd been keeping watch by the window, let out a low whistle. "I can't see a single car on the road. If Benjamin's really coming, he'd better hurry." Olivia nodded, heart thumping. She still wasn't sure inviting him was the right choice, but he had sounded desperate and worried on the phone. And in truth, she was worried about him too. The conversation at the resort earlier had left both of them tangled in frustration and unresolved questions. Maybe this forced confinement would give them a chance to speak freely, though the thought made her nerves jangle. Grace tugged on Olivia's sleeve. "Mommy, is that man going to stay here?" She remembered him from their recent encounters, especially the sweetness in his voice when he asked about their ski lessons. Olivia crouched down, eye level with her daughter. "He might. The roads are dangerous and I can't let anyone stay out in that storm." She glanced briefly at Naomi to ensure both girls felt safe. "But you two don't worry. We have plenty of blankets, and Mia is here too." A sudden thud against the front door startled them all. Mia rushed to open it, letting in a gust of icy air and a swirl of white that scattered across the entryway floor. Benjamin stood there, drenched in snow, his coat dusted like he'd emerged from a snowbank. He coughed, stepping in gingerly. For a moment, the living room fell silent except for the wind moaning behind him. Olivia quickly gathered herself and helped him shrug off the heavy coat, which was soaked and stiff with ice at the hems. Up close, she noticed his cheeks were raw from the cold, and his eyes held a haunted mix of relief and hesitation. "Thank you," he said, voice shaking slightly. "I almost couldn't see the numbers on your building." Mia shut the door against the howling wind. "I'll find a towel," she offered, hurrying to the bathroom. Olivia ushered Benjamin closer to the small space heater that flickered in the corner, hoping to chase the chill from his bones. Grace and Naomi watched him with wide-eyed curiosity. Their earlier encounters had been fleeting, overshadowed by the drama at the resort. But here, in the warm lamplight of their living room, everything felt more intimate. "You made it," Olivia said quietly, swallowing her reservations. "I was worried." He exhaled, his breath still frosty. "I owe you for letting me in like this. His gaze drifted toward the twins, who were staring unabashedly. The sight of them, in mismatched pajamas, seemed to melt some tension in his eyes. "Hi," he said softly, lifting a hand in a gentle wave. Grace blinked, a shy smile crossing her face. Naomi hid partially behind her sister but peeked out, curiosity shining in her gaze. "You're cold," she said with the frankness of a child. Benjamin managed a faint grin. "Just a bit." When Mia returned with a towel, he thanked her and dried his hair. The black strands stuck up awkwardly, and in a normal moment, Olivia might have teased him. Instead, she simply handed him an extra blanket from the closet. "I'll leave you two alone," Mia said after a moment, clearing her throat. "Let me check the news updates. Girls, why don't you help me see if we can find the radio station on the phone?" Grace and Naomi followed her to the kitchen, casting backward glances at Benjamin. The small apartment felt even tinier with him in it, standing near the flickering space heater, blanket draped around his shoulders. Olivia turned to face him, uncertain how to begin. The old resentments, the new questions, the swirling sense that they were on the edge of something irreversible. It all pressed in on her mind. "How bad are the roads?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He shook his head. "I barely made it. No one should be out there. The cars I passed were sliding all over. I'm guessing everything's going to be shut down until morning." She sighed, hugging her arms. "That means you're probably stuck here." A hint of self-consciousness flashed across his face. "I'm sorry. If there was another option, but I didn't want to see you alone in this storm." Olivia nodded, unsure what to say. She glanced toward the small kitchenette where Mia kept the twins occupied, the radio volume low but insistent with storm updates. From the speaker, a broadcaster warned of record snowfall and high winds continuing through the night. "Have a seat," Olivia said, gesturing to the worn couch. "You need to warm up." Benjamin settled beside the heater, adjusting the blanket around his legs. For a long moment they sat without speaking, the only sound the distant wail of the storm. Then he drew in a breath. "Look, about everything. I never meant for your job or your life to be at risk. This investor pressure, the paparazzi rumors, it's all spiraling." She pressed her lips together, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know it's not all your fault, but it's happening anyway. My boss practically told me to quit." His eyes clouded with remorse. "I won't let that happen. I'll do whatever I can to protect you and the girls." A flicker of old pain stirred in Olivia. "You said that once," she said softly, "and then you left to chase your career." He winced, looking down at his hands. "I know, but that was years ago. I didn't realize, no, I wasn't mature enough to handle what we had." His voice turned raw. "I didn't know about the twins." Silence opened between them again. She wasn't sure if he wanted an apology from her or if he was offering one of his own. The memories of her pregnancy flashed through her mind, the endless nights, the looming expenses, the loneliness. She fought a wave of anger, a voice inside her screaming that he should have been there. But the storm raging outside seemed to echo another truth. They were both trapped now, forced to deal with the present rather than rehash every moment of the past. In the next room, Mia showed the girls how to flick through radio stations on a small device. Snatches of static and faint music drifted through. Olivia took a steadying breath. "What about you?" she asked Benjamin, more gently this time. "Are you risking your own future with these investors by staying with us now?" He hesitated, his gaze distant. "They're not happy," he admitted. "They think I should keep my personal life under wraps. They want a squeaky clean image for the final signing, and a surprise family." He huffed, as though it sounded absurd when he said it out loud. "They're pressuring me to prove I'm in control, or they'll pull the deal." Olivia felt a stab of guilt. "That's everything you worked for, isn't it? The reason you left to begin with?" His eyes flicked up to meet hers. "It was," he said, voice soft. "But maybe I was wrong to make it the only thing that mattered. If losing this deal is the cost of doing what's right, then—" He trailed off, uncertain. "I'm not sure." Olivia studied him, torn between admiration for his newfound humility and fear that he might still choose business over them. A burst of childish laughter from the kitchen broke the tension. Grace and Naomi had found a goofy holiday tune on the radio, and their giggles resonated through the small space. Benjamin's expression softened. He cleared his throat. "May I talk to them?" She nodded, rising to her feet. Together they walked into the kitchen. The girls looked up, eyes bright with the thrill of staying awake later than usual in the midst of a snowstorm. Mia offered a small, encouraging smile, then slipped away to the living room, giving them space. "Mommy, it's so cold," Naomi squealed, hugging herself. "But Mia gave us hot cocoa." Benjamin glanced at Olivia for permission, then leaned in to speak directly to Naomi. "Hot cocoa sounds perfect. Maybe I'll have some if there's any left." Grace handed him a candy cane she'd been holding, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Here," she said simply, as though offering the world's greatest treasure. He accepted it with a shaky smile, grateful for the small gesture. "Thank you. I think candy canes and hot cocoa might be the best way to spend a snowy night." Naomi nodded vigorously, and Grace tugged on the hem of Benjamin's sweater, beckoning him closer so she could show off her latest crayon drawing, a childlike depiction of a tall figure in a suit with two smaller figures who had curly hair just like hers. The scribbled shapes of hearts floated in the background. "Is that us?" Benjamin asked, throat tight. Grace nodded. "You helped Mommy," she said with utmost seriousness, as though that was all the explanation needed for why he belonged in the picture. Benjamin's eyes flicked to Olivia, and she saw raw emotion shining there. In that fragile moment, the tension from the past days receded. It was replaced by something gentler and more terrifying: hope. A sudden ring tore through the quiet. Benjamin's phone. He fumbled to pull it from his coat pocket, glancing at the screen. Olivia could see the investor's name in bold letters. His expression fell, and the kids must have sensed his shift in mood because they both froze, wide-eyed. Benjamin stepped away, pressing the phone to his ear. Olivia couldn't hear all the words, but the tone was sharp and urgent. She caught fragments. "We can't have this overshadow the deal, and if you can't guarantee no scandal." The conversation grew terse, with Benjamin cutting in to protest in hushed tones. When he ended the call, the knuckles of his hand gripping the phone had turned white. He let out a harsh breath, closing his eyes. "They're threatening to pull out," he said finally, voice subdued. "Apparently the press is picking up rumors of a secret family story. They'll finalize the contract only if I assure them it won't become a headline." Olivia felt her stomach twist. Benjamin looked so torn, caught between his professional world and the messy reality of fatherhood that had landed in his lap. "If you want to protect the deal," she said quietly, "you can't let them see you here with us, right?" He didn't immediately deny it, and the pause was more painful than any outright admission. She lowered her gaze, bracing for the blow. But then he exhaled shakily, crossing back to where Grace and Naomi stood, their candy canes still clutched in their hands. "They asked me to lie," he said, each word clipped with frustration. "To pretend I have no connection here, to deny it all. I won't do that." The silence in the small kitchen was broken only by the wind rattling the windows. It sounded like the world outside was on the brink of collapse, all swirling ice and impossible cold. Inside, Olivia struggled to process his words. She had feared he might bow to pressure, but here he was, drawing a line. The twins seemed uncertain how to respond, but Olivia reached for them both, pulling them close. They nestled against her, warm and trusting. Benjamin looked on, the conflict in his eyes as deep as the winter night. Before anyone could speak, the lights flickered. A brief pulse, then darkness, then light again. Naomi whimpered softly. Olivia moved to check the space heater, making sure it was still running. If they lost power completely, the apartment would turn frigid in no time. Grace turned to Benjamin, as if seeking reassurance from the man she instinctively recognized as important. He looked torn apart inside, wanting to comfort her yet still grappling with his own role in this storm of problems. At last, he knelt beside them, letting the candy cane slip onto the table. "I'm here," he whispered. "All of you, you're—" He paused, voice catching. "I won't walk away from you again, but I'm not sure how to make this right." Sunlight broke through the apartment's curtains in pale streaks the next morning, a welcome change from the relentless wind and swirling snow outside. The blizzard had run its course overnight, leaving mounds of white in its wake. Olivia blinked awake on the living room armchair, stiff from dozing off in an awkward position. Across the room, Benjamin was slumped on the couch, the blanket half off his shoulders, the soft hush of his breathing signaling a deeper rest than he'd had in a long time. A faint scratch of tiny feet stirred in the hall. Then, as if on cue, Grace and Naomi scampered out of their room. They froze when they saw Benjamin sprawled there, the memory of the previous night's chaos clearly returning to them. Olivia rose, motioning for the girls to keep their voices down. She pulled the blanket over Benjamin's shoulder so he wouldn't shiver in his sleep, then quietly guided the twins into the kitchen. There, she surveyed the modest cabinets and fridge, trying to pull together breakfast. They were low on fresh food after being snowed in, but she managed to find some eggs, a half carton of milk, and a few slices of bread. While the twins set out plates with earnest determination, Olivia lit the stovetop, the click of the burner strangely comforting. She worked carefully, trying to keep her mind focused on the simple task of cracking eggs rather than the swirl of doubts that still lingered. Soon, the smell of sizzling butter and scrambled eggs filled the tiny kitchen, rousing Benjamin from the couch. He appeared in the doorway, running a hand through his tousled hair. For a moment, he seemed out of place in the cozy apartment, like a guest who wasn't sure where he belonged, and yet there was something strangely at ease in his posture. The twins greeted him with half-hidden smiles, as though uncertain they should be excited but unable to contain it. "Morning," he said softly. His gaze settled on Olivia, searching for any sign that she regretted letting him stay. She nodded in return, placing a plate of scrambled eggs on the table. "There's coffee, if you want some. I'm not sure how good it'll taste." She gave a small, self-conscious laugh. Benjamin smiled, stepping forward to pour himself a mug. "Trust me, it'll be perfect." He took a careful sip and let out a contented sigh, as though he hadn't expected to enjoy a simple cup of coffee so much. Grace beamed at that, swinging her legs under the table while Naomi nudged a plate closer to Benjamin. "You can have some toast, too," Naomi offered. "Mommy makes it nice and crispy." He looked at the girls, heart evident in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, voice warm. "Both of you are great hosts." Olivia glanced at the window, spotting a bright shaft of sunlight dancing on the windowsill. "The storm's finally dying down," she observed. Benjamin nodded. "I should probably check my car, see if I can dig it out or get it towed." He paused, meeting her eyes. "If that's okay?" She took a breath, forcing a tight smile. "Sure, go ahead." Grace and Naomi pouted a little as Benjamin excused himself to brave the icy drifts. Once he was gone, the twins grilled Olivia with their usual relentless curiosity. Why he was there, whether he'd stay longer, if he'd come skiing with them. She tried her best to answer without making promises or fueling false hopes. Mia, who'd woken just moments after Benjamin left, picked up on Olivia's cautious tone and steered the conversation toward fun activities they could do indoors if the snow was still too deep. Outside, Benjamin found his car half buried by a drift. Icy clumps clung to the wheel wells, and the windshield was plastered in frost. He tried starting the engine, relieved when it turned over with a sputter, but he soon realized he wasn't getting anywhere without a shovel and some road salt. As he trudged back to the apartment, he placed a quick call to his associate. The phone rang several times before anyone picked up, and the news he received was urgent. The investors had arrived in town early that morning, eager to push through final contract details despite the storm. Their impatience was at an all-time high. By the time Benjamin returned inside, his coat dusted with fresh snow, his jaw was set in a grim line. Olivia caught his expression immediately. "Everything okay?" He hesitated. "The investors are here, apparently. They want an emergency meeting. Today. Looks like they got in by private helicopter or something. They're pushing for a final decision." A murmur of tension flickered in the small apartment. Mia ushered the twins into the other room, giving Olivia and Benjamin some space to talk. He sank into the couch, running a hand across his forehead. "They're not thrilled about the rumors swirling around," he admitted. "My associate says they're more determined than ever to make sure I stay on message." The bitterness in his voice was undeniable. "I wanted to do a more community-friendly approach, bring local workers on board, but they see all of that, and the talk about me having 2 secret kids, as complications." Olivia folded her arms, leaning against the wall. "So you have to choose, sign the contract as they want it or take a stand." "Essentially, yes," he muttered. "And if I go through with their demands, it means denying everything. Denying you and the twins, publicly, at least until the dust settles." His voice dropped, an edge of self-disgust creeping in. "I can't do that." A pang of anxiety and admiration warred in Olivia's chest. She stepped forward, brushing his shoulder lightly with her fingertips. "They might pull the plug on the deal altogether if you refuse." "I know." He closed his eyes, exhaling. "But maybe that's the price I pay for the choices I made. If I lose them, I lose them." Her throat tightened. You never wanted to lose out on your dreams, though. That's why you left in the first place. His gaze lifted to hers. Maybe I didn't realize how important other dreams could be. I'm willing to fight for this, if you'll let me. A hush fell as those words lingered in the air. Despite all the pain, despite the resentment and the confusion, something warm stirred inside Olivia. She wasn't ready to trust him fully. There was too much history to untangle, but she found a spark of hope in his resolve. Late that morning, after the roads were partially cleared, the investor's driver sent a text to Benjamin announcing the meeting location, a private conference room at an upscale lodge on the far side of town. Even with the remnants of the storm, they insisted on a face-to-face to finalize the deal. I have to go, Benjamin said, glancing at the message. They're waiting. He gathered his coat, then turned to Olivia. Grace and Naomi peeked around the corner, sensing the tension. Benjamin crouched down to their level. I'm heading out, but I'll be back soon. Promise. Naomi frowned. You just got here. Grace twisted her fingers together, uncertain. Will we see you again? He swallowed hard. Yes, you will. Olivia watched him go, a heavy tightness in her chest. Her last view was of him standing in the doorway, dusting stray snowflakes from his hair, squaring his shoulders as though stepping onto a battlefield. The hours that followed were tense. Mia tried to keep the twins entertained, building a fort out of blankets in the living room, playing board games while the heater hummed. Olivia alternated between pacing the hall and staring at her phone, waiting for news. Outside, the sky cleared further, revealing bright sunlight gleaming off the thick snowbanks. The hush of a post-blizzard world was almost eerie, as though all of nature was holding its breath. When afternoon inched toward evening, the phone finally buzzed. Olivia snatched it up. Benjamin's name flashed on the screen. The call was short, his voice subdued. He simply said he was on his way over. She heard no celebration, no relief, only a quiet finality. She felt her heart sink, wondering if that meant everything had fallen through. She barely had time to compose herself before she heard a knock on the door. Rising, she let out a shaky breath and opened it. There stood Benjamin, hair disheveled from the crisp winter wind. He wore that same dark coat, but now his posture sagged with exhaustion. His expression was grave, shadows beneath his eyes. As soon as the door closed behind him, Mia ushered Grace and Naomi into their room, sensing the gravity of what was to come. In the settling silence, Benjamin met Olivia's gaze. A swirl of pain, resignation, and fierce determination played across his features. I may have just lost everything, but I refuse to lose you. Olivia's heart seemed to pause at Benjamin's words. I may have just lost everything, but I refuse to lose you. He stood there in the glow of the single lamp in her living room, face etched with both sadness and resolve. She hadn't seen him this raw before, not even when he first discovered Grace and Naomi were his daughters. A flutter of tension rose in her chest, and she pressed a hand against her collarbone, trying to ground herself. She glanced toward the bedroom where Mia had taken the girls, hoping to shield them from any painful scene. The apartment felt painfully small. Clearing her throat, she willed her voice to steady. Tell me, she murmured, bracing for whatever blow had fallen during his investor meeting. He exhaled slowly, the weight of the day visible in his posture. I tried to salvage the deal, he explained. I offered a more open approach, one that wouldn't treat you and the girls like some shameful secret. My investors, they wouldn't accept it. They demanded I deny having a family until the contract was signed, then keep everything quiet for good. I couldn't do it. Her eyes flickered with a mix of relief and dread. So what does that mean? Did you walk away or did they pull the plug? A humorless laugh escaped him. Maybe both. They said if I didn't comply, the deal was off. I told them I wouldn't stand by their terms. Next thing I knew, they were walking. I'm guessing the official announcement will hit local news in a matter of hours. Olivia sank onto the couch, knees weak. He followed, sitting beside her. For a few moments, they were both silent, each lost in tangled thoughts. She wanted to feel grateful that he hadn't betrayed her and the twins, but dread about the future weighed on her. "That means all your work, that massive project. It's gone?" His voice was tight. "It looks that way. Years of negotiations, weeks of back and forth with them here, and now, done." She swallowed hard, recalling the old Olivia who had loved him, who believed in his ambition. She could see that younger man behind his exhausted eyes, the man who left her once to pursue his future. Now that future had been upended, and she couldn't ignore the worry that twisted in her stomach. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, meaning it. "I never wanted you to lose everything." His gaze lifted, meeting hers. "I lost something more important years ago. You. And now, the twins. If standing by you means walking away from the deal, I'll do it." Emotion threatened to clog her throat. She reached for his hand before she could talk herself out of it, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "But it's complicated, Benjamin. I can't pretend everything's fine now. We still have to figure out what's next." He nodded, eyes clouded with concern. "What about your job? Are they still pressuring you to quit?" She hesitated, chewing her lip. "I haven't heard anything else since the storm, but rumors are definitely spreading that you lost the deal because of me. Some staff are saying I sabotaged the resort's future by causing you personal drama. My boss is furious. I wouldn't be surprised if he's already looking for an excuse to let me go." Benjamin's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. None of this is your fault." "Doesn't matter," she replied, voice wavering. "The manager thinks my private life is hurting the resort. I need the money to support Grace and Naomi. I can't afford to be jobless right now." A harsh ache built in Benjamin's chest. He thought about offering her financial help, but he knew how proud she was, and after everything that had happened, an offer like that might only alienate her. He swallowed the words and tried to focus on a solution. "Maybe there's a way we can—" Before he could finish, Mia peeked out from the hallway, frowning. "Olivia? Your phone's lighting up like crazy. Looks like your boss is calling." Olivia's stomach lurched. She stood, crossing to where her phone lay charging near the bedroom door. The display flashed the manager's number repeatedly. Her heart pounded as she swiped to answer, bracing for more bad news. She exchanged a tense, low conversation in the hallway, out of the girl's earshot. Benjamin edged closer, quietly catching snippets of her side of the call. "What? That's not fair. I was scheduled for tomorrow, and I'm doing my best. No, I haven't gone to the press," followed by, "If that's what you want, I can't stop you." When she finally ended the call, her eyes burned with frustrated tears. "He wants me gone," she whispered. "He's blaming me for the deal falling apart. Says the negative publicity is swirling too fast to contain. He asked me not to come in tomorrow or ever again." Benjamin's hand curled into a fist. "They can't just fire you without proper notice." "They can find excuses, you know that," she choked out. "I'm not in a position to fight it legally." She swallowed, pushing down a sob. "I'm out of a job, Benjamin, and I have rent to pay in a couple of weeks." He moved to embrace her, but she flinched back, tears brimming. "You've lost the deal, and I've lost my job," she murmured, voice trembling. "What are we supposed to do now?" Guilt and anger warred inside him. "I'm so sorry," he said, helpless. "Let me help. I have some resources left, not everything's gone." "No," she cut him off. "We're not a problem you can just throw money at. I appreciate the thought, but I need to stand on my own 2 feet. She drew a shaky breath. "And right now, that means I might need to move out of this place, find somewhere cheaper, maybe find work in another town. I'm not sure." A quiet knock came from the other side of the hall. Grace and Naomi appeared, shyly peeking around the corner, sensing the somber mood. Olivia forced a small, reassuring smile and waved them closer. They approached, hugging her legs as though they could tell she was upset. "We can't stay here if I can't pay rent," Olivia explained, keeping her voice gentle. "But we'll find a way, okay? Just maybe somewhere else." Naomi's eyes grew round with fear. "Will we have to go far away?" she asked. Grace looked at Benjamin. "What about him?" The question hung, heartbreakingly simple. Olivia and Benjamin exchanged a pained glance, neither sure what to say. At last, Olivia knelt, smoothing Grace's hair. "We don't know yet," she answered softly, "but we'll figure something out." The rest of the evening fell into an uneasy hush. Mia offered to stay with the twins, letting Olivia and Benjamin step outside for a brief talk. The plows had finally come through, and the streetlights revealed mountains of snow piled near the curbs. In the cold air, their breath rose in white puffs. Benjamin walked alongside Olivia, wishing he could hold her hand, but sensing she needed space. "I'll talk to the new investor group again," he said, voice heavy. "Maybe we can salvage some smaller deal, or at least protect the employees from fallout. Protect you." She shook her head. "I won't hold my breath. The manager wants me gone, and you said the investors walked out. A patchwork solution won't stop the rumors." She paused, looking down at her boots as they crunched through the icy sidewalk. "I don't think staying in this town is an option for me anymore." The admission hit him like a punch. "You'd really leave?" She lifted her gaze, eyes glistening under the glow of a flickering street lamp. "I can't see a future here now. They've basically turned me into a scapegoat. I need to keep a roof over my kids' heads, and I can't if no one will hire me. Everyone in this tiny place is already whispering behind my back. Word travels fast." He wrestled with the urge to promise he'd fix it, call the media, buy ad space to clear her name, do something. But he'd already seen how quickly money lost its power when reputations were at stake, and he'd seen how refusing to lie about Olivia and the twins had left him with no leverage among his old business partners. At the door of her building they halted, the hush of the snowy night pressing in. He reached out gently, taking her hand. This time, she let him. "I don't want you to go," he said, voice tight. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I wish I had another option." They lingered like that, breath frosting between them. Finally, she unlocked the door, and they stepped back into the dim warmth of the hallway. Benjamin glanced at her, ready to suggest some grand plan or at least a heartfelt plea to stick together. But the desolation in her eyes forced him to realize that words alone wouldn't change the reality swirling around them. He stayed another hour, quietly playing a board game with the twins in the living room while Olivia watched from the couch, arms folded tight as though holding herself together. The tension in the small apartment felt like a coil wound to its breaking point. Mia busied herself in the kitchenette, trying to give them the illusion of normalcy, but everyone sensed the edges fraying. Eventually, Benjamin said goodnight, promising to check in first thing in the morning. Olivia walked him to the door, the short distance feeling like a final corridor between them. They exchanged no parting kiss, just a solemn nod that spoke of heartbreak and lingering hope. Then he slipped into the cold night, leaving Olivia to face the aftermath. The moment the door closed, she sagged against it, tears gathering again. She felt Mia's gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm here," Mia whispered, "whatever happens." Olivia nodded, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. She wiped her cheeks and headed to the bedroom. She found the twins tucked into bed, curled against each other. They looked so peaceful, so unaware of the looming changes. Standing at the threshold, she knew she had to make a decision, even if it meant walking away from the only stability they'd ever known. Her mind spun with possibilities, leaving the apartment, borrowing money for a deposit on a cheaper place, searching for a new job in a neighboring town. The future felt like a vast chasm of uncertainty, but she couldn't let fear paralyze her. She packed a few small items that night, shoving them into an old suitcase she had tucked under the bed. Early morning light found her in the bedroom, unzipping and re-zipping the suitcase, mind racing through the tasks ahead, canceling her lease, finding a short-term motel until she landed something stable, explaining everything to Grace and Naomi in gentle terms. Her chest ached at the thought of uprooting them, but she didn't see another path. As Olivia zipped up her suitcase, she eyed a photo of Grace and Naomi. She whispered, "We have no choice but to go," not knowing Benjamin was about to make one final move. Morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating Olivia's half-packed suitcase. She sat on the edge of her bed, quietly sorting through piles of folded clothes. Each garment she tucked away felt like a reluctant goodbye to her little apartment, to the routines she had built, and perhaps to the faint hopes she'd harbored about staying here. In the next room, the twins woke up and ventured out, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Grace paused in the doorway, spotting the open suitcase. Naomi clutched a toy rabbit to her chest, frowning as she noticed her mother's worried expression. Olivia forced a small smile. "Morning, sweethearts," she said softly, laying a shirt neatly on top of the rest. "I'm just getting a few things ready." Naomi blinked. "Are we going on a trip?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. Olivia set aside the shirt. "We might need to move somewhere else," she replied, keeping her tone as gentle as possible. "But I promise we'll stay together." Grace and Naomi exchanged uncertain glances. They were old enough to sense there was more to the story, but neither of them asked further. Mia, emerging from the kitchen with a mug of tea in hand, ushered the girls away to give Olivia some space. In the hush that followed, Olivia's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She half expected it to be her former boss, hurling more accusations or demands, but Benjamin's name lit the screen instead. The memory of his final words, "I may have just lost everything, but I refuse to lose you," still echoed in her mind. She swallowed, bracing herself, and answered. "I'm at the resort," he said, voice jittery with excitement or nerves. "Can you come? I need you and the girls here, if that's at all possible." Her breath caught. "Why?" "There's something I want to show you," he replied, sounding both resolute and a bit anxious. "Trust me." She hesitated for a long moment. Part of her wanted to cling to the plan, pack up and leave this painful turmoil behind. Yet something in his voice stirred a spark of curiosity and hope. At last, she agreed, sensing Mia eavesdropping from the living room. When Olivia emerged from the bedroom, Mia raised her eyebrows questioningly. Olivia gave a small, uncertain shrug. "Benjamin wants us to go to the resort. I'm not sure what he's up to." Mia exhaled, a smile tugging at her lips. "Maybe you should find out." Gathering the twins, Olivia pulled on their coats and boots. With Mia's help, she managed to secure them into the back seat of her old, slightly battered car. The snowbanks along the road stood tall, but the plows had cleared a navigable path. Carefully, she steered toward the resort, her nerves knotting with each turn. As they pulled into the parking lot, the sun shone brilliantly on the freshly fallen snow, making it sparkle. Holiday decorations, the ones the resort had planned to impress Benjamin's investors, still gleamed along the walkways. Evergreen garlands, bright ribbons, and strings of golden lights. It looked festive, yet subdued, in the crisp winter air. She helped Grace and Naomi out of the car, then trudged through the snow toward the main entrance. Despite the bright day, it felt eerily quiet. Gone was the usual bustle of staff and guests. Inside the lobby, she spotted a handful of curious onlookers milling about. Standing near the grand fireplace, Benjamin caught sight of Olivia and the girls. He broke into a cautious, hopeful smile. "Thank you for coming," he said, stepping forward. He wore a dark coat, but no tie, as though casting aside the strict corporate persona he'd once so carefully maintained. Olivia glanced around, noticing a few familiar faces from the local press scattered about, camera equipment in tow. A jolt of alarm shot through her. "What's going on?" she asked, tightening her grip on Grace's hand. Benjamin took a steadying breath and motioned for them to follow him toward the wide, open space near the fireplace. "I know rumors have been swirling," he began, raising his voice just enough for the nearby reporters to hear. A hush fell over the lobby as people realized something was happening. "I know the business deal I was working on has fallen through, and I know many of you have heard talk about my personal life, specifically my family." Olivia's stomach did a nervous flip. She glanced down at Grace and Naomi, who looked up at her for reassurance. She gave them a small nod. Benjamin's hand brushed against Olivia's in a gesture of silent support as he continued speaking. "I made mistakes," he said, voice resonating with genuine regret. "Years ago, I left someone important behind, chasing a future I thought I needed, and in doing so, I missed out on the most precious gifts life could have given me." His gaze swept to the twins, who stood shyly by Olivia's side. A few cameras clicked, the flashes reflecting off the polished floor. Benjamin's expression was steady, though his cheeks tinted with nerves. "I won't hide my family," he went on firmly. "I won't pretend they don't exist, and I won't apologize for standing by them now, even if it costs me every investment penny. There's more than one way to shape a successful future in this town, one that respects the people who live here, and I plan to find that way, with or without certain investors." Soft murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Some wore expressions of sympathy, others of curiosity. A local reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand, clearly wanting to ask questions. But Benjamin held up a hand politely. "This isn't a press conference," he said gently. "I just needed you all to hear the truth. I won't shy away from it anymore." Olivia's throat felt tight as she watched him stand before a half-curious, half-judgmental crowd, telling them all that her children were his and that he was proud of it. Despite the swirl of confusion and lingering anger she still felt, a warmth flickered inside her. He turned to Olivia then, voice lowering. "I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness so easily," he said, ignoring the hush around them. "But I want to stand by you now. You and Grace and Naomi deserve better than secrecy and half-truths. I'm ready to prove it, whatever it takes." She blinked, emotions crashing over her, relief, fear, gratitude, and a pang of old wounds not yet healed. But the sincerity on his face was undeniable. Reaching out, she took his hand in a trembling grip. "It'll take time," she whispered. "But thank you." Grace and Naomi, sensing the shift, pressed in closer. Grace slipped a tiny hand into Benjamin's, while Naomi wrapped an arm around Olivia's leg. The flash of cameras was momentarily disorienting, but Benjamin shielded the girls from the brunt of it, guiding them gently away. Resort staff who had gathered looked on in a mixture of surprise and quiet support, perhaps realizing that the man they once saw as a distant, profit-driven investor had shown a very different side of himself. Soon the crowd began to disperse, leaving behind a sense of cautious optimism and lingering curiosity. The local reporter, still at the edge of the lobby, lowered the microphone. She gave Olivia a small, respectful nod, as if to say, "I've got what I need for now." Olivia exhaled, turning to Benjamin. "I guess that was your plan," she said, her voice tinged with awe and uncertainty. He nodded, shoulders slumping as if a great weight had lifted. "I couldn't let you and the girls vanish from my life." His gaze moved to Grace and Naomi, who hovered close, entranced by the towering Christmas tree near the fireplace. "I want to try, really try, to do this right." A manager from the resort, one Olivia had never seen before, approached them, introducing himself as a representative for an alternative investor who might be interested in a smaller, more community-driven venture. He extended a handshake to Benjamin, then turned to Olivia with a more respectful manner than she'd experienced in the past weeks. She exchanged a surprised glance with Benjamin. Was it possible that not every potential partner wanted to bury the story of their family? They spoke briefly, the manager offering to arrange a meeting to discuss a new kind of partnership, one that might involve local hires, sustainable growth, and a more inclusive vision. Though skeptical, Benjamin listened intently. Olivia watched his expression, seeing the familiar spark of ambition in his eyes but also sensing a softer edge, a realization that family came first this time. When the conversation ended, the manager took his leave, leaving Benjamin and Olivia to process this unexpected shift. A shimmering sense of hope mingled with the holiday decorations all around them. The tension of the past days still clung to them, but for the first time, Olivia felt a path forward that didn't involve running away. Sensing the moment, Grace tugged on Benjamin's coat. "Look at the big tree," she said. Naomi joined in, pointing at the star perched on top. Benjamin knelt down, letting the girls chatter about the ornaments that gleamed in the fairy lights. Nearby, Olivia watched him crouched beside them, her heart softening at the sight of him, earnestly listening to every excited word. For so long she had done everything alone, convinced that any hint of reliance on Benjamin would lead to heartbreak. Now it seemed he was choosing this path wholeheartedly, and that choice glowed as warmly as the holiday lights overhead. She stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. He rose, turning to her with a hopeful light in his eyes. Without overthinking it, she pulled him into a brief, tentative hug. The twins giggled, clapping at the sight of them embracing. Benjamin reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a knitted scarf in a deep, festive red. He draped it around Olivia's neck with a quiet smile, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Let's make this the first of many Christmases together." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.